The arena went silent the moment Bruce Lee stepped onto the mat. Across from him, Muhammad Ali waited, every inch a force of nature, every breath a challenge. Then Ali whispered, almost casually, "Go first." 7 seconds later, the impossible happened. A man known for raw power felt the weight of precision, speed, and control like never before. In those fleeting moments, history was not only observed, it was rewritten. Every eye in the room witnessed skill measured against force, potential destruction held back by choice. Bruce Lee didn't just move. He defined what mastery truly meant. The room was still, the air thick with expectation. Bruce Lee, lean and coiled like a spring, stepped onto the mat with measured confidence, aware of every eye on him. The murmurs among the onlookers were hushed, a mixture of awe and skepticism. Across the mat stood Muhammad Ali, a titan of a man whose presence alone carried history. He didn't move, he didn't need to. Ali's gaze, sharp and calculating, held a challenge without words. Then came the whisper that altered the rhythm of the room, "Go first." Bruce's heartbeat accelerated, not from fear of the man, but from the weight of the unspoken. Every move, every choice, would be observed, dissected, remembered. The mat beneath his feet felt simultaneously infinite and confining, a stage for skill that bordered on peril. Witnesses later described the tension as palpable, one could almost hear the collective intake of breath. He shifted his stance, feet subtly adjusting, each micro-movement a test of balance. It was more than technique, it was instinct honed by years of discipline. He knew Ali's power, the reach and unpredictability that came with the world champion's hands. Bruce's decision to step forward first was a psychological gambit, a declaration that he would not be intimidated, yet it carried the silent acknowledgement of risk. As his body settled into motion, there was no flourish, no theatrics. The first movement was a subtle probing, a faint feint, an assessment of Ali's reactions. Observers noted the difference immediately. Bruce moved with a speed that made the air itself seem to bend, but always with control. There was an economy to his action, a refusal to waste motion. He was testing not just Ali, but himself, feeling the edge of what he could unleash without losing composure. Ali responded, a tilt of his head, a shift of weight, and the room collectively leaned forward. Even in those initial seconds, the contrast between raw power and precise skill was visible. Bruce's eyes tracked, measured, and predicted. Ali's presence radiated force, a potential for chaos that could erupt at any misstep. One witness later said, "You could see him thinking 2 moves ahead, and yet, he wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to win yet, he was proving something else." The whisper of "Go first" hung like a command in the air, but Bruce's understanding of it went deeper. To lead was not simply to act, it was to define the rhythm, to establish control in a scenario where losing composure meant more than defeat, it meant harm. Every muscle engaged, every tendon primed, he was aware of the fine line between demonstration and devastation. And then, for the first time, he moved with intent. Not to strike, but to show, to measure. A flick of a hand, a shift of a weight, a blink and you miss gesture that spoke of capability far beyond the obvious. The room noticed, not the speed, but the precision. That tiny window, 7 seconds in, already contained a message. Bruce Lee had arrived, and the fight, if it came, would be as much mental as physical. The audience exhaled collectively, though no one moved. Tension coiled, tight and patient. In that instant, Bruce's mind registered the smallest emotional quiver in himself, a recognition that he could destroy, but did not have to. It was a crack, almost imperceptible, in his composure. Silence followed. Observation followed. Judgment, too. Bruce's movements became a quiet conversation with the space between him and Ali. It was a study in proximity, an unspoken dialogue where power and precision measured each other. Observers noted the way Bruce shifted his weight, almost imperceptibly, testing the champion's reactions. His body betrayed nothing, muscles relaxed yet ready, a paradox only achieved through years of deliberate practice. Ali, towering and confident, didn't launch an attack. Instead, he mirrored, shifted, and allowed Bruce the initiative. In those seconds, the mat transformed into a laboratory of skill. Witnesses later described the tension as almost unbearable, a silent pressure that compressed the room. You could feel history happening, one recounted. Not with fists, but with intention. Bruce probed carefully, a light tap of his lead hand grazing Ali's guard, testing reflexes, reading posture. It was not a strike meant to harm, but a statement: he could reach Ali if he chose. Every movement carried calculation, distance, timing, leverage. One false step, and raw power could overwhelm; one hesitation, and he risked losing control. Yet Bruce was deliberate. He executed a series of micro-feints, each faster than the last, shifting his torso, snapping his shoulders, flicking a leg with near-invisible speed. To the untrained eye, the motions were minimal, almost ornamental. But the witnesses closest saw the precision: a foot pivoted just enough to unbalance, a shoulder dropped fractionally to bait a response, eyes calculating angles that even Ali could only sense, not name. Ali's response was subtle: a slight sidestep, a hand raising in anticipation, a tilt of his weight. There was no aggression yet, the energy was almost magnetic, the room collectively holding its breath. Observers later remarked on the tension between potential violence and controlled restraint. Bruce's actions were proof that mastery was as much about self-imposed limits as skill. Even in this initial contact, Bruce's emotional control was tested. He felt the surge of adrenaline, the instinct to dominate, to strike decisively. But experience held him back. One witness described a flicker in his expression, a brief acknowledgement that the power he carried could end everything in an instant. "He's afraid of himself," they said. Not Ali. The pattern grew: probe, measure, retreat, reset. Each micro-movement was a rehearsal for decisions yet to come, whether to escalate or restrain, to demonstrate capability or to avoid real damage. Bruce's body was in motion, but his mind mapped every possibility. By the end of the exchange, the observers sensed a shift. Speed had been shown, but not brute force. Control had been asserted, yet with tension that promised sudden escalation if provoked. Bruce had communicated without words: he understood the stakes, the threat, and the responsibility of choice. The room exhaled quietly, though no one moved. The first contact ended not with a strike, but with a question: how far would this go? Bruce shifted slightly, feeling the subtle pull of Ali's presence. It was not enough to call it fear, more a careful awareness of raw potential. Every fiber of his body was attuned to the champion's micro-expressions, the barely perceptible tightening of muscles, the rhythm of breath. Witnesses later described the moment as almost theatrical: two forces measured in fractions of a second, the room suspended in expectation. He began testing the boundaries, the limits of reach and reaction. A low kick, swept almost lazily, traced the edge of Ali's guard. The sound was muted, almost inaudible, but the room registered the threat. Another movement, a pivot, a weight shift, his fist arcing just shy of connection. Each probe carried intention. This was not a fight yet, it was a negotiation in motion. Ali responded with subtle deflections, shifting his center of gravity, demonstrating that his experience was not solely in brute force. Every adjustment Bruce made met a counterbalance. Observers noted how the dynamic was a dance, yet one loaded with latent violence. Even the most casual bystander could feel the danger lurking beneath the choreography. Bruce's mind worked faster than his body moved. Each probe, each feint, generated a cascade of assessments: if I extend too far, I risk overcommitment; if I hesitate, I signal weakness; if I strike, I may unleash more than necessary. The psychological tension was nearly as sharp as the physical. He was aware, acutely, that mastery involved both the ability to destroy and the choice not to. Then came a moment of subtle misalignment. Ali shifted slightly too early, exposing a sliver of vulnerability. Bruce's reflexes reacted instantly. His hand flicked forward, precise, testing. Observers later described the motion as almost imperceptible, yet loaded with intent. The challenger's counterweight adjusted, absorbing the probe, but the warning was clear: speed could overwhelm power if controlled perfectly. Emotion entered the frame. Bruce's composure, usually unshakable, showed the tiniest crack. He felt the surge of potential, the latent violence he could release. Witnesses noticed his eyes sharpen, his breathing shallow, as if weighing the moral stakes along with the physical. This was the edge, where skill met conscience, and instinct collided with restraint. The sequence ended with Bruce stepping back, hands lowering slightly. Not surrender, but assessment. Ollie remained poised, unreadable, a mirror of experience and caution. Both men had communicated without words, the power dynamic was established, the parameters tested, and the invisible line of control recognized. Observers later reflected on the significance of the moment. It was not speed alone, nor power alone, that impressed. It was the synthesis, an understanding that mastery demanded both technical excellence and moral awareness. The tension hung in the air, audible in the silent breaths, visible in the smallest gestures. By the end of this testing, it was clear, Bruce had demonstrated that control could coexist with explosive potential. He had shown his edge, but not exploited it. The room remained suspended in anticipation, a question hanging above the mat, when the true challenge came, which would dominate, destruction or discipline. The first probes had set the stage, but Bruce sensed the inevitable shift. A subtle tightening of Ali's stance, a narrowing of his eyes, signaled the transition from observation to engagement. Bruce adjusted, every micromuscle reacting with pre-calculated precision. This was the moment where skill would meet power in full, not recklessly, but deliberately. He moved faster now, testing the edges of control. A rapid series of jabs, so small they seemed inconsequential, brushed against Ali's guard. Each strike was measured, enough to elicit a reaction, but not to harm. Observers noted the choreography. Bruce's movements were economical, deliberate, and devastatingly efficient. Ali responded with slight shifts, his weight distributing in anticipation of impact. Every motion told a story of experience, years of combat distilled into fractions of a second. The room held its collective breath. Witnesses later recalled that the tension felt almost tangible, a living thing pressing against their chests. The escalation wasn't loud or chaotic, it was precise, surgical, controlled, and terrifying in its promise. Bruce's speed had increased, but so had his awareness. He knew the power at his fingertips could inflict serious damage, yet he restrained it. One fleeting misstep could have changed everything. Bruce's mind raced through possibilities, the trajectory of his limbs, the strength behind each movement, Ali's potential counters. Each decision balanced risk and consequence. The psychological strain was as sharp as the physical exertion. He was aware of the thin line between demonstration and destruction. Then came the critical instant. Ali shifted unexpectedly, testing Bruce's timing. In that fraction of a second, Bruce realized he could strike decisively, end the exchange, and assert dominance. Muscle memory and instinct converged, his fist could connect, his foot could sweep. He recognized the raw potential in that tiny opening, and hesitated. Witnesses later described a subtle change in his expression, an almost imperceptible flicker of inner conflict. This hesitation was telling. Bruce was capable of extraordinary violence, yet the moral weight of that choice pressed on him. He understood the consequences. One strike could cause real harm, alter the trajectory of the encounter, and leave a mark that was more than physical. Instead, he controlled the action, redirecting energy, slowing the rhythm, and asserting dominance without injury. The tension remained, but now it carried a different weight, one of deliberate restraint. Observers noted how the dynamic had shifted, the room sensed the edge, the possibility of devastation, and the deliberate decision not to cross it. The escalation ended not with a strike, but with a demonstration of skill mastery. Speed had been shown, control had been asserted, and the psychological stakes had deepened. Bruce had revealed both his capacity and his restraint, leaving the audience suspended between awe and apprehension. In those moments, it became clear, mastery was measured not by destruction, but by the ability to impose order on potential chaos. The mat was no longer a space of tentative testing, it was a proving ground for choice, power, and consequence. And Bruce, standing poised, had already begun to define his legacy in silence. The air thickened as Bruce leaned slightly forward, coiled like a spring, aware of the magnitude of what he could unleash. Ali's presence was magnetic, his body a lattice of raw power, experience, and instinct. Every shift in weight, every subtle tightening of muscle radiated potential violence. Bruce's eyes scanned, calculating, anticipating, not with bravado, but with the acute understanding that he alone controlled what might happen next. The first deliberate strike came in the form of a feint. Bruce's hand flicked forward, faster than sight could track, aimed to provoke, to measure. Ali reacted instantly, his guard adjusting, his center of gravity shifting imperceptibly. Observers later described the tension in the room as almost unbearable, a living, breathing pause in time, where every person present felt the possibility of catastrophe. Bruce's mind raced in tandem with his reflexes. Every movement had consequences, every decision carried weight. He could strike decisively, end the confrontation with a single blow, assert dominance in a way few men could. The potential for real damage pressed against his consciousness like a tangible force. Yet, in that moment, he recognized the moral boundary, an invisible line between capability and choice. He advanced subtly, each step a negotiation of space and timing. A precise kick swept past Ali's guard, close enough to test reflexes, distant enough to avoid harm. Ali countered with slight shifts, his body communicating experience without words. Witnesses noted the fluidity, the balance. This was escalation without recklessness. Speed had become a tool of psychological pressure, control had become a weapon in itself. Then came the moment of decision, the fraction of a second when instinct screamed for aggression, when the power Bruce held could wreak serious consequences. Muscle memory had already prepared the strike, the foot, the fist, but his awareness imposed restraint. He could destroy, but he chose not to. His chest rose and fell, the faintest tremor of emotion betraying the inner struggle. He was afraid, not of Ali, but of himself, of the violence he carried. Witnesses later described it as the most striking moment of the encounter, Bruce, capable of overwhelming force, intentionally stepping back, moderating motion, controlling the outcome. The silence that followed was not emptiness, it was weight, the collective acknowledgement that what could have been catastrophic had been contained by discipline. The psychological impact rippled outward. Observers saw not just skill, but judgment. They sensed that Bruce's choice defined the encounter more than any strike ever could. The moral tension, the ability to choose restraint over destruction, marked him as exceptional, more than a fighter, more than a technician. He had been pushed close to the edge, and in that moment, the edge defined him as much as any skill displayed. Bruce stepped back fully, lowering his hands, his body still coiled but controlled. The decision had been made, capability without cruelty. The room exhaled collectively, though no one spoke. It was not relief, they were in awe. In the quiet aftermath of that choice, the first real crack of emotion appeared in Bruce's composure, almost imperceptible. A man capable of violence, yet conscious of restraint. A fighter who understood that true mastery was measured not by what you can do, but by what you choose not to do. The mat lay still after the final movement, a quiet stage marked by tension rather than impact. Bruce's hands lowered slowly, his body finally uncoiling, yet the energy remained. Witnesses described the room as suspended in disbelief. They had seen speed and skill, raw potential harnessed, and, most importantly, restraint exercised under pressure few could comprehend. The fight had not erupted into chaos, but the imprint it left was indelible. Bruce felt the echo of every decision, every flick of muscle and tendon. There was a lingering awareness of what could have happened, of the destruction he had narrowly withheld. Emotion, previously tucked beneath controlled exterior, pressed against him now, an undercurrent of fear, of awe at his own capacity. The room did not know it, but Bruce had faced the most formidable opponent in that moment, himself. Ali remained poised, a calm colossus, his expression unreadable. Yet even he acknowledged the precision and discipline he had witnessed. There was no taunt, no challenge left to issue, the encounter had become something larger than a duel. Witnesses later reflected on the paradox, a confrontation without strikes that would remain in memory as violently potent. The psychological intensity had surpassed any physical exchange. Observers' reactions varied but converged on a single theme: respect. Some described the subtle tension in their own breathing, the sensation of being on the edge of danger without ever feeling it. Others noted the mental choreography, the awareness that Bruce had not merely reacted but had anticipated, restrained, and consciously chosen the outcome. In the whispers that followed, one phrase recurred: he could have ended it, but he didn't. For Bruce, the aftermath was quiet but profound. The incident etched itself into his understanding of combat and human behavior. Mastery, he realized anew, was as much about ethical boundaries as it was about technical skill. Every movement, every pause, had carried weight, every choice had tested both ability and conscience. The encounter forced him to confront the duality of his own nature, the capacity for violence and the discipline to moderate it. This moment also reframed how others remembered him. Witnesses carried the memory of speed held in check, of power tempered by awareness, and of a man standing on the precipice of force without succumbing to it. Accounts highlighted not only the technical mastery but the controlled intensity, the deliberate restraint, the subtle emotional vulnerability that humanized a figure often mythologized. One observer later wrote, "The strongest man in the room was not the one who could strike hardest, but the one who knew exactly when not to." Long term, the encounter influenced Bruce's approach to both teaching and combat. He internalized the moral calculus of choice, understanding that every engagement carried consequences far beyond the mat. The story of that day circulated quietly at first, passed among students, fighters, and witnesses, growing into legend not for the knockout that never came, but for the restraint that defined the act. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the room retained an almost sacred silence. Bruce remained, collecting himself, aware that history had registered a subtle shift, that skill measured not only in action but in the deliberate choice to withhold could leave a mark deeper than any strike. He glanced once toward Ollie, who offered the faintest nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that needed no words. The encounter had ended, but its weight lingered. Bruce understood, as all who observed later recounted, that true mastery lay not in domination, but in the deliberate, conscious decision to control what one could easily destroy. A witness would later encapsulate it perfectly: the strongest man in the room is not the one who wins. It's the one who knows exactly how much damage he chose not to do. Silence followed.